Thank you, Kristalina Georgieva, for joining us in today's show. Can I begin with, you attended the debt roundtable in the morning. What kind of a solution are we looking at?
For the first time, we are bringing all creditors, new and old, public and private, and debtor countries to discuss debt resolution. Without bringing everybody, it is very difficult to overcome what has become serious obstacle to fast and fair debt resolution. And I am very encouraged by the active participation of all this morning, as well as the commitment of the private sector to listen to everybody else, as well as to the debtor countries. We have set up an agenda for working in the future that is very practical. It concentrates on matters that require resolution and would help make progress faster.
There are concerns around, asset capture and also geopolitical concerns subsequent to such an asset capture. Do you think the outcome would be able to address these concerns?
Right now, our priority is to help countries that find themselves in very difficult situation as a result of high level of debts, increase of interest rates, and dollar appreciation. All this at the same time. And these countries are very keen for focus on practical way forward. We have 4 countries that have asked for debt resolution under the common framework: Chad, Zambia, Ethiopia, Ghana. Only Chad is already completed. We have to act on the other 3. And then we have a number of countries that are not eligible for the common framework, like Sri Lanka, that are in a very difficult place. So our priority is to define how we can practically address the demands from the countries to be fast, predictable, and resolute.
Right. In terms of the assessment of the global economy, 2 months back, it looked pretty gloomy, and the latest assessment coming out from IMF, things look brighter. What's really happening there?
Things look less bad. And what has happened is, first, resilient labor markets and consumers in the US and in Europe. Second, very rapid action in the European countries to free themselves from dependency on Russian oil and gas that allows their economies to move up. And 3, China reopening, making China again a contributor to global growth. We also see signs that inflation may be finally going in the right direction, in other words, down. So we have, on one side, still the concern that growth this year is decelerating. It is slowing down further, and last year it wasn't very high to begin with, 3.4% 22, now we predict 2.9 for 23. But some signs that growth is bottoming out and inflation is trimming down.
If we look at US and their central bank's assessment, they're still talking about tightening further. And that has ramifications for emerging economies such as India. We have pressure on our currency. How do you sort of see that really playing out? What's your take?
But this is when good news may turn into bad news. The fact that the US consumer is spending and the economy is working and the unemployment is incredibly low, historically low, means that the job of the Fed to tighten and bring inflation down is harder. It is very important, though, that the Fed stays the course. Why? Because if we do not return to price stability, that is a big impediment to growth, to investors to invest, to consumers to make long-term purchases. What is the impact for the rest of the world? Of course, that makes it harder for emerging markets to see their currencies appreciating, and it makes it harder for emerging markets to fight inflation on their own territories. But what we saw here, and this is why this G20 meeting is so important and so useful, is that we all can identify collectively what is the course to follow and how to do so with best possible outcome for the world economy.
So now that we're much hopeful of a recovery, is it time to pull back on fiscal levers?
Oh, I am very glad to see that many countries have already started pulling back spending that they had to do during COVID. This is the responsible thing to do. The Indian budget indicates that kind of fiscal discipline and directing more attention to capital spending that is fundamental for long-term growth. We recommend to countries to put in place medium-term anchor that would give a sense of the trajectory of public spending. And we are also very keen to see much more attention paid to raising revenues, close down loopholes for tax collection, and then direct public spending where it would have biggest impact on productivity and growth.
The IMF, in its assessment of Indian economy, and you also, have at various fora said that India is a bright spot. Do you think the focus on macroeconomic balance has helped the country?
Oh, it has helped tremendously India. The focus on reforms that we have seen over the last years, with very, very dramatic, very important systemic reforms, especially on the tax harmonization side, on the way India pursues digitalization, that has played a huge role for India. India is offering the world a concept of using public digital infrastructure as a foundation for both public services to improve and private sector to blossom. We are very keen to use our engagement during the G20 presidency for sharing these lessons from India. And I'm very encouraged to hear Prime Minister Modi not wanting to stop here, but to go further, especially in using the talent of women in India. We know that India's growth can go higher if women participate more fully in the economy, and all the steps that are taken in this direction are really excellent.
Absolutely. South Asia's, there are concerns in the region, especially with regards to debt. Is IMF in a position to help all the countries around India?
What we see is a very high demand for IMF to engage with countries, and rightly so. We have 4 countries in your neighborhood that have come to us for support: Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan. We are working, of course, in the specific circumstances of each of these countries accordingly. And I am very grateful to India for also being engaged with us in especially the case of Sri Lanka. It is impossible for even a strong and large country like India to be an island of growth and prosperity surrounded by a sea of insecurity and poverty. So working with the countries around for them to implement reforms, for them to have the prospects for high growth, this is paramount. I want to praise Bangladesh, because what we have seen in Bangladesh is the smarts to come to the fund preemptively, not because problems have been accumulated, but because it is uncertain time and problems can accumulate. Our program with Bangladesh is an example, hopefully, for other countries to follow. They also tap into the new concessional instrument of the IMF, the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, that helps a country highly vulnerable to climate change to build resilience to future shocks.
Post-pandemic, we saw, protectionist policies, nations coming out with protectionist policies, and now, there is this huge fear of deglobalization. Do you see these trends continuing, taking a more serious form?
It is very concerning that the world is turning away from what has made us all wealthier, healthier over the last 3 decades, and it is an integrated global economy. We have done a study at the IMF on the cost of fragmentation, and it is a very interesting conclusion. If we build security of supplies rationally without slipping into unnecessary protectionism, it would cost the world economy but only 0.2% of global GDP. If we do it the wrong way with a lot of protectionist measures, unnecessary protectionist measures, it can cost us up to 7% of global GDP. This is, imagine, taking Germany and Japan out of the world economy, $7 trillion equivalent. And if we combine this with technological decoupling dramatically executed, it can go for some countries up to 12% of GDP. So it is not trivial what are the choices we make. This is why being here in India in the G20 format, so very important that we try to build the rationale for a world that remains integrated and as a result more productive. Over the last 30 years, we have tripled the world economy. Who is the biggest beneficiary? Emerging markets, developing countries. They quadrupled with massive reduction of poverty as a result. But rich countries also benefited. They doubled. So when we think for the future, emerging markets must be very forceful in protecting a world economy that functions in a harmonious way, because they are those that are going to be most affected, especially small developing economies. So India is standing now in this discussion for the whole emerging world.
There's this whole talk about supply chain shifts, and it started around the COVID pandemic. Do you see it gaining ground, and is it something that can work out as a policy?
There are some positive lessons drawn out of the pandemic. One of them is very simple. You cannot put all your eggs in one basket. You cannot have everything that you need being supplied from one source. This diversification of supplies is a rational economic decision, and we see in the world of vaccine production some diversification taking place. We would see it also in other areas where dependency on one source can put an economy at risk. But again, 2 important messages from us. One, don't try to bring everything home, because at home you may also be hit. Just look at Turkey and how the earthquake disrupted the economy. 2, when you think of diversification of supplies, think of ways in which you can do it that is not bringing unnecessary restrictive measures. In other words, follow economic logic. And I hope that we would all have the smarts to do that.
There's a lot of discussion around crypto assets. India also, we've seen our central bank has very strong views and they favor a ban. At the IMF, what is the discussion like? What kind of a framework are we looking at for crypto assets?
Very timely to ask this question, because our board just discussed a paper we put forward on crypto assets. And the conclusions we draw are threefold. One, we have to differentiate between CBDCs on one side and privately issued digital assets on the other side. And within the privately issued, we have to differentiate those that are backed, stable coins that are truly stable, and crypto assets that are not backed and where the risk is much higher. They're an investment asset, not money. And when we look at the use of this, clearly crypto assets cannot be a legal tender. And our whole membership, 190 countries, broadly agrees with that. Three, we need to regulate the crypto world much more prudently and actively than we have done so far. And in that sense, as we move forward, for consumer protection and protection of financial stability, yes, specifically the unbacked crypto assets, countries have to have the ability to address them, including not taking entirely the threat of a ban off the table. When you have it, it is not the preferred option at all. We want the innovation that comes with more openness in this space. But for policymakers, protecting consumers and financial stability remains top priority.
But can a regulation be evolved for, intangible assets like crypto assets? How does it work across countries?
So when you look at this world of digital money, on the side of CBDCs, the biggest issue is interoperability. Can different platforms allow us to still go with cross-border payments? And most recently, India and Singapore agreed on that kind of cross-border payment. So this is a very important place for policies to come to work. And then on the other side is, how do we allow the crypto world to continue to evolve? There is a technological aspect of it, but there is also a policy aspect. For example, protection of data, the ability to protect consumers from risks. What could a meaningful regulation be? Of course, first and foremost, transparency, information about risks. So you as a consumer, you can differentiate a stable coin that is really stable from one that is not. And then giving a good sense as to how exactly transactions are going to be done and monitored in a world in which, as you said, this is not a tangible. This is not like a note that you can hold in your hand.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that it has to be left to be a wild west. We do have to have principles and regulatory frameworks in place. And so we are now being charged, the Financial Stability Board, IMF, Bank for International Settlement, to work on these frameworks.
How soon can we have this come?
Well, in fact, at the IMF, we have already defined 9 areas that are related to macro, financial, legal, and cross-border issues that define the work that is already being done and what more has to be done. So I'm very mindful that we have no time to waste, that if anything, we have to run faster in this area. So you would see at the next G20 meeting a very substantive discussion on this topic.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining us and giving time to the Economic Times for an interview.
Thank you.